Assalamu'alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ladies and gentlemen, today we would like to explain about the linguistic operations in structuralism, especially on the Jonathan colors in pursuit of science. I hope you enjoy these explanations.
Okay, the first thing is Jonathan Cooler biography. Jonathan Cooler was born in 1944. He is an American literary critic. He is class of a 1960 professor of English and comparative literature at Cornell University. His published works are in the fields of structuralism, literary theory, and literary criticism. He is an important figure of structuralism movement. The structuralism believe that language, culture, and literary phenomena have a system that operate this and give them meaning. And he also believed that the linguistic structuralist model can help formulate the rules of particular system or of convention rather than simply affirm their existence. He posits language and human culture as similar. Structuralism argues that a specific domain of culture may be understood by means of the structure of the language. So, what is structuralism? Structuralism is a movement of thought in humanities, widespread in anthropology, linguistic, and literary theory, and influential in the 1950 and 60, based primarily on the linguistic theory of Ferdinand de Saussure. Structuralism considers language as a system of sign and significance. The elements of which are understandable only in relation to each other and to the system. In literary theory, structuralism challenges the belief that the work of literature reflects a given reality. Instead, a text was constituted of a linguistic convention and situated among other texts. Kuller gives an example to support his idea. Actions are meaningful only with respect to a set of institutional conventions. The most important lesson from the linguistic operation in structuralism is that linguistics has over other disciplines of humanities and social science that without opposing the notion of causal explanation. They can shift from historical to an historical perspective, an attempt to describe system rather than trace the antecedents of individual living. Next, in pursuit of science, criticism occurs because the signs of literature are never simply given as such but must be pursued, and different modes of criticism can be described by the account they give of this pursuit. Semiotic, which defines itself as the science of science, posits a zoological pursuit. The semiotician wants to discover what are the species of science, how they differ from one another, how they function in their native habitat, how they interact with other species. Confronted with plethora of texts that communicate various meanings to their readers, the analyst doesn't pursue a meaning. He seeks to identify signs and describe their functioning. For the other critics, this general and classificatory project is of minor interest. Like a hunter pursuing a particular piece that will make a splendid therapy, they have a more precise goal. A sign sequence is there to be interpreted. One pursues it to capture its meaning. Okay, then in pursuit of science, discuss researchers who are trying to find out how all science can be benchmarked for a past, present, and future condition. In this case, Kohler tells about semiotic as a symbol of the academic system. He tries to engage less in explicit evaluation of semiotic as a discipline than a consideration of the way that reflection on science is affecting contemporary scholarship in the humanities and social science. So, according to Kohler, the importance of this new discipline, as previously explained, namely making the past living present and designing the future.
Hello everyone, this is me, Favian Gisala Marzuq. Today I would like to answer several questions about the discussions for this topic in pursuit of science. So the first question is describe the contemporary situations of the humanities. After read the whole text, at least in the end, I can conclude that this is actually talking about the observer that determined by its developments and wishes to make a project like article and etc. So the purpose is to imagine the future from whose practic that they can construct. They can't see the future, they just only imagine the future as it says on the page 41. A statement about the forces at work in the present always implies the future, and method requires only proceed with some awareness of tendenciousness of our procedures. So that means the observer required method to do something such it's mentioned on the next sentence. But if our subject is not the progress of a national economy or the fortunes of a political party, if our subject is a method itself, method as manifested in some of the varieties of contemporary scholarship, then the observer's difficulties are compounded. That's why the observer have some problems that seems not to be found, but there's questions about it among many imaginable. Correctly define the present is another questions. So what is the questions? What kind of causations it as at work in the movement of ideas? The answer is our understanding of the intellectual activity of earlier centuries doesn't usually take the form of causal reconstructions. Characteristically, or our discussions of an age focus on a few commanding projects, which but sum up and transcend the activities of many preceders and contemporaries, then I think that this is not thinking about the futures or talking about something, but the situations of the contemporary is just trying to talking about before and after, like the past and contemporary. So I can conclude that this is the situations of the humanities on the contemporary situation is just about the past, present, and the futures, like the color says, and it has relations on the questions number two. Now I'm going to answer the second questions. What is the significant contributions of the semiotic to contemporary scholarships? I think, in my opinion, humanities here is a part of society, like therefore this society needs language and it means for communication. So language is for communications. Moreover, the language was the systems that produce as signs and letters semiotics deconstruct the meaning. So semiotic construct a meaning. Then the humanities here are more inclined toward the situations of using language in humans at levels of society with the science. So every society has a science and language, and the symbols like a symbol like fashions and code with the procedures and specific configurations or the significations of codes. Then the point is that because of the person maybe has a different cultures and a different language, and of course the interpretations of the semiotic itself is different. Then the interpretations of the meaning or sign will also be in accordance with existing conventions. Therefore, semiotic has an influence on society. But as we can see on the page 43 says, if one reflects on the significance of semiotic, one must be consider the way in which research and writing in the humanities and social sciences are affected by the presence of new articulations of knowledge. It is just example like new objects, questions, or criteria. And as the new disciplines make a place for itself, it makes a path for itself, climbing certain scholars, prosecutors, and interpreting their work in a new light, identifying and redefining forces previous at work in older to disciplines and now come into their own as a semiotic. And second one, maybe a new discipline has broad implications for contemporary scholarship by the questions it asks and the kinds of answer it seeks, arguing explicitly for its methods and purposes. It brings to the fore criteria and preoccupations which become relevant to the discussions of other disciplines, and more especially like anthropologists, literary critic, linguists, and others are affected in that they must decide whether to move towards or stay in the semiotic point of view. And finally is a new discipline project a future. So the new discipline project a future. And as a color says that less in explicit evaluations of semiotic as a discipline than a considerations of the way that reflections of science and affecting contemporary scholarship in the humanities and social sciences, and the emergence of a new discipline, as Scholar says, create a past, articulates a present, and project a future. For the third question, is describe the differences between Pearserian semiotic and Saussurean semiotic. Of course, the differences between Pearserian semiotic and the Saussurean semiotics are the basic principles and the background. As we already know, Peirce is a philosopher and Saussure is a linguist. Then, according to the book on the page 44, now that the people are attempting to do this and have given the name of semiotic or semiology to their pursuit, one effect is the cast into prominence as producers and honored two men who, in the early years of the century, envisaged a comprehensive science of sign: the American philosopher Charles Sanders Peirce and the Swiss linguist Ferdinand de Saussure. So, the Saussure theory is the principle that emphasizes language as a system of sign, and beside language, there are many other sign systems that exist in the world of mankind. So, in this opinion, the system of language science or language is the most superior science system compared to other science systems that exist in the real world because it plays an important role in constructing reality. So, Saussure focused on the underlying systems of language called as compared to the use of language barrels. So, he focused on the underlying systems of language called lang as compared to the use of lang parallel or speech. And Peirce proposed the term semiotic, which according to him is synonymous with the concept of logic that focus on the knowledge of human thinking process as the portrayed. So the main principle of Peirce is a theory that the human mind and sign boundaries, the three-dimensional systems, or we call it as a triadic and trichotomy, and the relativity regarding the three typologies or taxonomies of science like icon, index, and symbol between both scholars from the two different approaches and continents. So the one from Europe and other one from America, namely semiotic approach introduced by Peirce and Saussure. Okay, now I'm going to answer the fourth questions. Describe the contributions and the method of structural linguistic or semiotic to Levi-Strauss structural anthropology. As we can see on the page 49, the point is that semiotic enable us to perceive in the sense intellectual activity a general tendency, variously stated and of differing degrees of explicitness to stress the role of symbolic systems in human experience and thus to think in terms not of antonymous object but of systems of relations. So the case of Claude Levi-Strauss, who more than anyone else is responsible for the development of structuralisms in fields outside linguistics, he illustrates nicely both the major principles of structuralist semiotics and the curious way in which such insight may emerge. All three demonstrate that underlying understanding consists in reducing one type of reality to another, that the true reality is never the most obvious, and that the nature of the truth is already indicated by the care it takes to remain elusive. The three cases were not versions of a single reality called history and based on the causations. Each discipline employs the temporal projections of many very different sorts to describe what is essentially a structures in a system. A basic principles of structuralists analyze to understand phenomena is to reconstruct the system of which they are manifestations. And then structural analysis in linguistics and anthropology, in which Levi-Strauss argues that anthropologists might learn more directly from linguistics what he had discovered in more oblique confessions, Levi-Strauss explicitly avoided the model of causal explanations because this is one of the more important lessons that linguistics has offered other disciplines of the humanities and social sciences, that without opposing the notions of causal explanations, they can see from a historical to an ahistorical perspective an attempt to describe system rather than trace the antecedents of individual events. Okay, so this is number 5. Describe the contributions of semiotic in literary criticisms and or literary study. I think the contributions of semiotic in literary criticism is to establish the key theoretical models that can provide insight so that the connections of the text to broader meaning structures within literary practices can be better to understood. As it says on the page 59, semiotic attempts to make explicit the implicit knowledge which enables science to have meaning. So it needs reader, not a person, but the functions, like the repository of the codes which account for the intelligibility for the text, because literary works to have meaning for the readers. Semiotic undertakes to describe the systems of conventions responsibility for those meaning. So we must discover how it occurs if we wish to understand ourselves as social and cultural being. But literature itself, in its continual process on the violations of codes, reveals the paradox inherent in the semiotic project and its philosophic orientations of which it is in the culminations. The semiotic of literature thus give rise to the constructive movements. So what is the constructive movement? This is were initiated by Jacques Derrida, which originated from his criticisms of structuralisms. Structuralisms is notions that consider all orders in the world to be structured, derived from language. Language is not just a means of scientific communications, but language is a science systems that express idea. Signs are the relations between signs. So the meaning in structuralism's difference is binary opposition. It's called binary opposition. The absolutely Haykal because which means that there is a higher for better status. Like for example, white is considered better than black, tall is considered better than short, and this structural language influences the structural styles of human thinking. So thinking styles define our cultures and perspectives. For example, like we always want white skin, sharp nose, tall, slim body, perfect, and so on. And we become very afraid and worry if our skin turns black and nose is short and fat and so on. And then so this is in which each pole of the positions can be used to show that the other is in error, but which to undecedable dialectic gives to rise to not synthetic because the antimony is inherent in the very structures of our language in the possibilities of our conceptual frameworks. So this is the last questions. How can be semiotic considered as the critique of the logocentric assumptions? As we can see on the page 60, what Jacques Derrida calls the logocentrisms of Western culture, the rationality which treats meanings as the concept or logical representations, that is, the functions of a sign to express. We speak, for example, of various ways of saying the same thing, like semiotic begin as a critique of the logocentric assumptions that concepts exist prior to and independently of their expressions. In analyzing signification, Saussure and his later followers insist that the forms and concepts do not exist independently of one another, but the sign consists of the union of a signifier and pursuit of sign and signified. So there will be a sign and signified with signifier signified. Semiotic doesn't escape logocentrism, though the source of meanings is no longer as consequences, consciousness in which they exist prior to their expressions. Their source becomes a system of differences which semiotic treats as the necessary conditions of any act of significations. One does construct this perspective by arguing that the differences ultimately responsible for meaning did not simply fall from heaven, but are themselves products. Acts of significations are necessary to create signifying differences. The fact that the pursuit of semiotic leads to an awareness of its limits, to an awareness that significations can never be mastered by a coherence in pursuit of sign, and comprehensive theory should not be a reason for spurning its analytical programs as if there were some more valid or comprehensive perspective on significations.
Then this material is talking about the condition at the time on the contemporary structuralism, and then the Quran says that semiotic can project the future, and semiotic has three contributions: that it can create past, articulate present, and project the future. Then he makes sure the difference about Saussurean semiotic and Peirce semantic as the discussion, just like we told you in advance. Saussure come from linguistic and Peirce come from philosophical background. Saussure is more specific than Peirce.